I'm conscious that our audience is fairly global for this. So we've got June with us on the call today, who's up in the Philippines. We often get people from Seattle and Stockholm and a few other places around the globe as well. So while this has a uniquely Australian flavour, we try to make it relevant to as wide an audience as possible. We're going to dive into a little bit of specifically Aussie territory today because of the COVIDSafe app and some input that we can have around that. But we'll also make our format as broad and all encompassing as we can, so that we're not getting down in the weeds of uniquely Aussie issues. So it's my great pleasure to welcome and introduce Brian Smith. I've known Brian for a number of years now. He's a well-experienced leader across a range of industries. He started out as a military leader, and he's done time in some of the larger oil and gas companies around the place at the interface between leadership, technology, and companies. I admire Brian's leadership. He's a man of great character and a thoughtful and responsible leader. He's one of the most considered people that I know. It's always a pleasure talking with Brian because of the degree of thought that he puts into what he has to say. He's in the area of technology, but he's really focused on how do you make a difference in the world through that medium. So Brian, it's a great pleasure to spend a bit of time in your orbit again. Welcome. Your current world is Quad IQ, and you stepped out of a fairly well-paid gig at a large oil and gas company to start a life of an entrepreneur and
crazy
fire up a company from scratch.
Yeah.
How have you found that?
Oh, look, it's a great experience. You haven't really lived until you've started your own business, I think. And anyone who's done that will know exactly what I mean. Coming out of, best part of 30 odd years in big institutions, and then suddenly being responsible for everything. Running a small business, you have a lot more respect for, just the person down the street running the fish and chip shop. You just look at them completely differently once you've done it yourself, but a lot of fun.
Yeah, indeed. And Quad IQ, your company has been one of the organisations that hasn't really experienced any sort of slowdown. In fact, if anything, the opposite through this period.
Yeah.
How's your growth and projections against what you were hoping for the business when you fired it up? What, about 2 years ago, is that right?
Yeah, coming up sort of 2.5, coming up, I guess, to our third birthday, really. But we've grown really quickly, and it's been very satisfying to see us sort of execute on the plans pretty precisely as to what we laid out sort of 3 years ago. Cybersecurity is a very rapidly growing sector. It's a big problem. And yes, there's a lot of players out there trying to do their bit, but there's also a lot to be done. So, it's going well, and the last couple of months have been pretty nerve-wracking for everybody in business. But the dependence on technology at the moment is intense. So, we're certainly seeing a demand for our skills. Currently, yeah.
So if we focus in on that for a while, I guess we're a very technological oriented world anyway now, and particularly in business with so much in the cloud and a lot of business conducted across all sorts of borders globally and locally via tech interfaces. What are some of the sort of key threats that are around in that kind of space that you protect your clients from, and what do you see as some of the emerging ones, I guess, that result from the current circumstance we're in with COVID-19?
Yeah. We do two things in the business. We provide 24/7 protection to our clients, so we look after their security for them. then we also service a lot of people through our incident response and investigations part of the business. So this is where people who aren't an ongoing client, but they've been hacked, and they need to be dug out of it. So we get sort of two perspectives on it, really. Hopefully we get one perspective of people who are doing it well and proactively, and then people who are sort of on the other side of that equation, having to respond. So, look, the shift to the cloud has certainly opened up a whole myriad of new threat vectors for people, to lose data, to be the victims of a ransom type attack, to suffer sort of reputational damage, and to be the victims of fraud. So those things are sort of running rampant, really. It's not to say they don't exist in cloud, non-cloud businesses, more traditional businesses. They absolutely do. But and what we've seen over the last few months is the rapid digital transformation of some of those traditional businesses. So people who haven't been on the cloud, or haven't been able to facilitate, say, remote working or mobile working, have had to adopt those technologies incredibly quickly, and it's been a huge success story for most people. What we're starting to see now is the after effects of some of that rapid transition. So, and our incident response practice is just starting to see people who are coming to us now having been hacked on very new platforms that they've adopted. So they've been up and running for a month or two on a new platform, think it's all going well, and some of the cracks are starting to appear.
So when you say a new platform in that case, are you referring to something that's new to the business, or the platform itself is new?
No, new to the business. So they've just adopted a technology that they haven't been using, or they've using it in a different way, and then finding themselves a bit out of their depth in a security sense, because obviously at the time that was not the priority.
So I guess if we look into the threat side of things, one of the ways particularly scam tactics work, and that in recent times, comparatively recent times, that's been technological, but humans have been doing it to each other for a long time.
Yep.
I remember a mate describing, well before the internet was a thing, going to New York and three dudes playing with, 3 cups, which one's the ball under, and people are laying down $50 to guess which one the ball's under, and he's looking at what's happening and going, oh, that looks pretty bloody easy, I'm chucking 50 in. And it turned out that all the people that were playing were actually part of the scam, and he's ended up with about $300 US on the table in various states of play, and they've just folded it up and bolted down the street.
Yeah.
So scamming is not unique to the tech world, but it certainly adds the interface. There's always an element where people attempt to put you under some sort of pressure and elicit a rapid response. I've seen a few just lately of things like, your website's about to expire and click here and fix it. And if I wasn't actually across the fact that I'd paid for that back in November last year, it could fairly easily drag you in. In terms of people, I guess we can talk at the level of individuals, families, small businesses, large enterprises. There's a need to sort of separate yourself a little bit from that initial emotional pressure and response. What do you recommend to people in terms of, I guess, awareness and just safety generally, and then if there's anything more specific that you get into around that?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's really interesting. There's lots of things have come out lately, and like today, the scam of the day is an Australia Post scam saying we tried to deliver a parcel, and you weren't there, so click on the link to find out where to get it. So obviously that's exploiting what is clearly going on in the world, which is everyone's online shopping. This is a probably likely phenomenon that Australia Post might have been unable to deliver a post. Or actually, it's pretty unlikely, because I don't know about you, but I can't go anywhere, so I'm always here to receive package. But but it's obviously exploiting the psychology of it, and I think
Mm.
that's what I encourage people to do. Is these are not machines that are trying to hack you; these are people trying to hack you, and so they're using pretty simple psychological devices to trick you into doing something that you don't want to do. So,
Mm.
you know, probably the number one thing people can do is use their gut instinct. If it doesn't feel right, if it doesn't make sense, like you just explained, you know, if you happen to know that that's not likely, that should be your precursor to actually look at that email a bit more closely, check where it's from, and be careful of clicking on it at all. You know, at an individual level, the things I say to people is don't click on things for the purposes of finding out whether it's dangerous. Then it's too late.
Is this hot?
Unfortunately, unfortunately, we see that a lot. People say, "Oh, that looks suspicious," so I thought I better find out whether it's suspicious and click on it. Well, you've just sort of detonated the bomb to test whether it was live or not. So, um, so, so don't do that. There are some really key things that individuals and organisations, for that matter, have got to do. So you've got to patch the systems that you're working off. You've got to make sure your operating systems are up to date. These things are full of vulnerabilities, and I know we're going to talk about COVIDSafe, the app, in a minute, but even apps like that are going to have updates sent out for them regularly, and if you don't adopt those updates regularly, well, when they're put out, you've got vulnerabilities or backdoors sitting in your system. So that's everything from your operating system to your Microsoft Office suite to your Apple iPhone, you name it. They're regularly getting updates, so make sure you patch them. The other key thing is, and this is a bit technical, but there's a feature in almost all major software platforms now called Multifactor authentication, which is one of those little apps that you have on your phone where you've got to put in an extra number. It's like a second part to your password. It's absolutely critical. I saw some interesting stats from Microsoft the other day. 99% of all breaches of Microsoft platforms over a 12-month period could have been prevented with multi-factor authentication. So,
wow, okay.
If you have that enabled, you should use it. If you're not used to using it, get over it. You have to use it if you're going to use any sort of online banking these days, more or less. It's becoming commonplace. So anything to do with social media, so Facebook, Instagram, all have multi-factor authentication. Obviously, Gmail and Hotmail and Outlook Mail, those sort of things all have it. Enable it. Make sure you're using it. And then the last thing I say for individuals is get a good quality antivirus platform on your devices. So if you've got a Mac, make sure you've got antivirus on it. There's a myth that Macs don't need antivirus. You should have it. You should definitely have it on all your laptops and desktops. And if you've got an Android phone, you should absolutely have it as well.
Yeah, right.
It's probably the three big things.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. They're really useful tips. And, you know, I've just made a mental note to myself right there about especially the two-factor authentication thing. You know, there's some parts of our platforms where we've most definitely got that set up, and a few others where it's like, oh, that just seems like a bit of a hassle. So that's a good prod in the ribs and some good logic as to why. Yeah. Definitely worth that extra couple of seconds of inconvenience. Let's dive into COVIDSafe app then. So for people that aren't Aussies, this is an app that the Australian government, federal government, has released, the Australian Department of Health, with the intent of being able to notify people and not track their location, but track their contact with people who have COVID-19. The intent is to be able to much more rapidly than via more traditional means track and trace the progression of the disease in the community, and thereby head it off at the pass when we start coming out of some of our restrictive lockdown stuff that we've got going on in the country right now. There's been a lot of rumbles about this. So, you know, there's everything from full-blown conspiracy theorists saying it's a bloody horrible thing to people just concerned about privacy and security, having a look at the reviews of it, technical issues around Bluetooth interfaces with other things that they're trying to use or play with, and draining battery. So I reckon the biggest one of those, because most of them are just about functionality and usability, the biggest one of those is obviously the privacy and security risk factor.
Yeah.
What's your take on that, Brian?
Yeah, look, there's a couple of things about the app itself, and even though it's an Australian one, I'll note, there's versions of very similar technology being used, I think in South Korea, in Singapore. The UK government is about to release one which is very similar, and there's other versions around. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see more of these popping up in one way or another. The technology that goes into it, even though these apps are quite new, the technology that sits underneath it is not new. So near-field communications over Bluetooth is what they call it, but that's been around for a while. Every time you use your phone to make a purchase, if you've got that set up, that's what you're using. And you're being tracked when you buy a cup of coffee or some groceries using your phone, if you're using that functionality, which I know a lot of people do these days. So, so the bits and pieces that underpin it aren't that new. Couple of things I'll say about it. Look, it has been thoroughly tested by some highly competent people. Particularly the encryption that goes into the app is very sophisticated. It's very sophisticated and complicated. In fact, if you can be bothered actually reading through some of the documentation on how it works, it's actually quite challenging to get your head around bits of it. Elliptical encryption is quite a complicated
You're saying
thing.
that, I'll just take your word for it, I reckon.
Yeah, I've spent a bit of time trying to unpack it, but yeah, look, so I think as a device, it's fairly secure. I think the degree to which people trust the government is always sort of on a bit of a scale, but I'd much rather have this technology in the hands of government than non-government. And what I sort of always remind people is this app is collecting much less data than Google Chrome, which you've probably got running on your phone, which is tracking you, as opposed to the COVIDSafe app, which is only sort of creating data points when it comes into proximity of other apps. Whereas Google Chrome is tracking you more than once a second, and that data is not going towards public health authorities. It's going towards a big American internet search engine company, and so it's all a matter of relativity. You've got all sorts of things usually running on your phone that present some risk, and look, there's no doubt that COVIDSafe will present some risks in the future as well. Any app has to be updated. We're likely to have to use it for a long time, possibly more than a year. So no doubt there'll be updates to it as they find vulnerabilities or they tweak it or whatever. So it's like every other app, you've got to keep it up to date. Make sure you manage that risk. But I think compared to the benefits of it, from a technical perspective, I think the risks are pretty well controlled.
Yeah, nice. So in terms of the benefits of it, we're getting slightly out of the world of technical conversation here and into possibly a civic duty and certainly a public safety one. The government's obviously selling it pretty hard as a way of significantly enhancing their capability to react to instances of COVID-19 in the community and to protect that community spread. What's your take on that? Should we, as responsible Australian citizens, be downloading it and using it?
Yeah, look, I mean, caveat, of course, that I'm not a public health expert, but I'm gonna say absolutely it's beneficial. I can understand the science behind it, put it that way. That's exactly what we do in cyber. We try and collect enough data about our clients we're protecting so that we can piece together the signal, the very weak sort of signal in the noise, or the needle in the haystack, piece together that data to find the threats. And so the science is really similar. From the data that the government's trying to collect, although in a much more sort of compartmentalized way that they're doing it with the app, but it's exactly the same principle. So I totally understand what they're doing, and yes, it's likely to make a massive difference to managing the virus. So I mean, just as a citizen, I look at it and think, yeah, it makes complete sense to me that we would do it. And if you look at how they're intending to use the data, it's pretty easy to visualize that you might save a life, and you might save your own life to be totally selfish about it. You might save your own life by downloading it, and it's only by a large percentage of the population having that app running that it's actually going to work. So, you know, for my, it's an individual choice, obviously, but for mine, it's an absolute no-brainer. If you're potentially going to save a life, the privacy risks are pretty trivial in comparison to that, and even in isolation, they're pretty small. So it's an easy one.
And I guess juxtaposed against something like Google, where we're using it every day anyway, and we're not saving lives by doing that, it sort of puts it into perspective a fair bit.
Yeah.
On the massive data and use of data side of things, what sort of uptake do they need to make it genuinely effective?
Yeah, look, I've heard 40%. You hear a lot of that 40% figure in a lot of big data sort of scenarios, and I'm also not a mathematician, so I've got to be careful commenting here. But you hear that 40%. You know, you've got to have 40% sort of immunity to create herd immunity in a population, or more than 40%. And you've got to have more than 40% having the app, so that there's statistical likelihood that enough people are going to be covered by the tracing. So I often wonder what 40% are you measuring? If we've got 25 million people in Australia, is it 40% of all people, or are you counting adults or people likely to have phones, or I don't know. But it's a lot of people. So I think I read today 5 million people have got it. So by any measure, we're kind of about halfway, somewhere between halfway there and kind of nearly there for that 40% as a country. So I think we're still short. And that's probably one of the shames, is that we may not get there to make it actually genuinely effective.
So I guess a practical outcome of this call for me, I'd have to say that I was somebody that was sort of sitting on the fence a little bit about it. It's kind of like, I can see the point. It's probably worthwhile. Hadn't looked into the security stuff in enough detail to satisfy myself one way or the other. On the strength of this conversation, I'd be pretty confident to say, yep, I'm uploading it. And I think based on your expert opinion around cybersecurity, I'm more than happy to say the risk's way less than the advantage. And, maybe in terms of doing our bit in Australia, we could get a little bit infectious with the people we know and spread some sound data and information out among the people that we come into contact with. So that's an action I'll be taking out.
Good. I mean, one of the things I mean to mention is, everyone's got, well, not everyone, but I certainly have got an old handset sitting around that doesn't have a chip in it anymore. I've actually put COVIDSafe on that phone. It means that it can wind the battery down. It's not going to bother me. There's nothing else running on it, so the battery life is stunning, in fact, because there's nothing else on there. COVIDSafe doesn't need a 4G telephone connection to work. It works off Bluetooth and internet. So as long as you have it connected to the internet, just to download it, and then if you actually need it, i.e. to upload to let the health department know that you're sick, you don't need it to be connected to anything else. So I just carry those two phones around with me, my normal phone and this other phone, and that works. So you can, and the reason I'm doing it is just to show to people that if you're really, really nervous, there are ways to manage the risk, and I think a number of the potential risks with it are managed by having it on a separate phone like that. Don't have to do that, but it's just to prove a point.
Yeah, great. And it certainly totally eliminates some of the speculative criticism that says it's tracking where you are and who you're with and all that sort of thing. So that's great. And I guess if we turn our focus briefly back to the global audience and just say, look, with other countries running things like this and more likely to bring similar tactics online, is it fair to say that your assessment of the security side of it would be relatively similar? Are they likely to be built on the same kinds of technology and platforms?
Yeah, there is sort of two camps for these apps. There's those that are anonymous and those that aren't. And basically, there's a few sort of more differences how they sort of push messages out, and then also how they, with some functionality around communicating. And I think the UK one's an interesting example. That's going to have a feature whereby the app itself can communicate out or be used as a communication device,
right,
back to potential contacts of people who've been infected, for instance. So there's some variations there that open up some interesting different side discussions about this.
yeah,
And of course the ones that aren't anonymous are really, you know, interesting again. But the basic principles are probably the same. I suspect there's going to be great variations. I'd be looking, if I was in another country, I'd be looking, okay, what testing has the government had done on it? Who did the testing?
yep,
And asking those sort of questions, and then sort of take into account what information are they actually getting from me
yep,
to sign up,
yeah.
weighing that up. Yep.
Thanks for that. So let's take a bit of a sideways step out of there and just say, you know, one of the things I admire about you and your work in your current business is the way that you blend head and heart and purpose into the organisation, and you've articulated your organisational mission. I think it's a absolutely stunning example of how well that can be done in an organisation that's not immediately obvious as a for-purpose organisation, such as a not-for-profit, you know, disability support organisation or health organisation, for example. I'll just share my screen and show people what you wrote. This is basically, hopefully that's coming through for you. This is basically what Brian pretty much hand wrote on a screen, and it hangs up in this form around the business. It's a great snapshot that combines, I think, a really great summary of what we're here for, how we're going to do it, and why it's important. Do you want to just say a little bit about, from a leadership point of view, arriving at this kind of statement and what it does within your business in terms of creating focus and resilience?
I think, you know, the thinking that was sort of in my head and in those of the sort of the other leaders around me when I sort of wrote it down was about making sure everyone in the business understood how important we were and the role we played in the lives of our clients. And you know, if you've been in the business for a little while, you get a keen sense of this. But this is, you know, obviously particularly people for sort of new to the business or new to the profession, even that it can come as a bit of a shock when you see someone you're around, whether you're already protecting them or whether you're called in after the fact, to see them be victimised by a cyber attack. And you know, it can be quite financially devastating. You know, can be reputationally devastating, but it also can be quite psychologically damaging as well. When people are hacked, they are the victims of a crime, and so they feel often a lot of the same psychological sensations that people have when they fall victim to other crimes, including physical crimes. So, it being asked to protect people or help respond to those situations conveys a responsibility to those people involved, and you know, so I always felt it's important to make sure that people understand the central importance of that notion. And the other key thing is, of course, it's an adversarial and dynamic contest. There are bad people on the other side of this equation. We're not dealing with the forces of nature or some sort of universal constants here, or even the forces of economics. We're actually up against bad people, and making sure that everyone understood the importance of those sort of that reality. So, you know, the importance of that protective role that we play, and the fact that we have to try to be better in that contest. And that when that we're never really finished. That race is never run. We've never arrived.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that can be, that's quite a challenge to motivate people that, we actually never have arrived. We've got to be continuously improving, continuously learning and adapting and agile and all those things. So, yeah, it was really important to make sure I conveyed that and make sure people understood it.
Yeah, great. I think it's a great example of a piece of leadership that is, one of the challenges of leadership is repeating yourself over and over again in ways that are significant and meaningful to your customers and to your business without sounding like a stuck record. And it's a really good example of a piece of that communication and guidance, I think, within a company. Brian, if people wanted to get hold of you and either find out more about Quad IQ and how you can be of support or assistance, or get any further information, what kinds of things could they contact you for, and how would they do it?
Yeah, look, I'm always happy to talk to people even if they've got sort of small queries, particularly your circle, Mike. If you've got questions about protecting their themselves or their families or their small businesses, Quad IQ and our services businesses Slipstream generally sort of supports sort of medium to large enterprises in the work we do, unless you've actually unfortunately been breached, and then we're sort of willing to help anyone in that situation. But yeah, look, if you're after advice or a pointer, happy to get in touch, and happy for you to get in touch, and we'll set you in the right direction.
Yeah, great. And the best way to get in touch with you?
Just by email is probably the best one. So brian.smith, brian.smith @quadiq.com.
Great. Thanks very much for that. We'll include those details when we send this out, so that people don't have to frantically rewind and scratch that down.
Yep.
Brian, thank you very much for your time and your generosity. It's always a pleasure speaking to you, and anybody with some expertise in their domain. I think that you've added a lot to this conversation about recovery. That's, we're in for the longer haul part of this now. We're out of the acute response, and some of these sorts of measures around keeping ourselves safe, our families and our businesses safe, and assisting authorities wherever we reasonably can is going to be a good part of our landscape for a while. So thanks for your contribution to that.
Yep.
In terms of the next couple of weeks over these calls, next week we're going to be talking to Michael Ford from Castaway Forecasting. They do financial forecasting for businesses, and it'll be useful territory for people to think about, both at a business level but also at an individual and family level. The following week after that, I'm talking to the wonderful Suzanne Waldron. Suzanne's a TEDx curator here in Perth, a human behavioural change specialist, and we're going to be taking a bit of a romp through some of the human and social impacts of COVID-19, both now and in the longer term, and also what some of the sort of cutting edge thinkers around the world have been contributing to the space during this time. And at the end of the month, I'll be talking to Rachel Callender, who is a stunning communicator specialising in helping medical people talk to families of kids with disabilities. And she has a whole bunch to offer on how do we, as we begin to reconnect, how do we reconnect with our tribes, our communities, our clients outside of a restricted world that we're in. And I reckon by around the end of May, at least here in Australia, that picture will be starting to open up. So feel free to join us, 2 p.m. Perth time on Wednesdays. We'll be running this at least until the end of May, and then we'll see what the state of play is, whether we carry on some more after that. Thanks very much. See you soon.